What if an entire world collapsed, not over centuries, but within a single lifetime? Not a slow decline, not a fading empire, but a sudden, violent unraveling of everything people depended on. Around 1200 BCE, some of the most powerful civilizations on Earth began to fall. Cities burned, kingdoms disappeared, trade routes that once connected continents fell silent. Writing itself vanished in certain regions. For those who lived through it, the world they knew did not just change. It ended. This is the story of the Bronze Age collapse. A mystery buried in ash, broken walls, and fragments of desperate messages. A moment when history seemed to fracture without a clear cause. And even now, no single explanation fully answers what happened. To understand the collapse, we need to enter a world that seemed stable, wealthy, and deeply connected. For centuries before the disaster, the Eastern Mediterranean was dominated by powerful states. Ancient Egypt stood as one of the strongest kingdoms of its time, ruled by pharaohs who commanded vast resources and monumental building projects. The Hittite Empire controlled much of Anatolia, maintaining authority through diplomacy, military power, and strategic alliances. Across the Aegean, the Mycenaean civilization built fortified palace centers and dominated mainland Greece. These societies were not isolated. They formed a network that stretched across the region. Kings exchanged letters written on clay tablets, addressing each other as equals. They sent gifts of gold, finely crafted weapons, luxury textiles, and rare materials. Royal families intermarried, creating bonds that tied distant courts together. Merchant ships crossed the sea carrying copper from Cyprus, tin from distant lands, and goods that moved through many hands before reaching their final destination. This was a system built on connection. Bronze itself revealed how delicate the system was. It required copper and tin, often sourced from far apart. Without steady trade, bronze production would fail. Without bronze, weapons, tools, and symbols of power could not be maintained. The strength of kingdoms depended on materials that had to travel across long and uncertain routes. At the center of this system stood the palace. Palaces were not just homes for rulers. They were administrative centers. They stored grain, controlled labor, managed trade, and recorded transactions. Scribes kept detailed records on clay tablets. Armies protected territory and enforced authority. Everything was organized, measured, and controlled. For generations it worked, and then something began to break. Across the Eastern Mediterranean, destruction layers appear in the archaeological record. Not in one place, but across many regions. Cities show signs of intense fire. Walls collapsed, buildings abandoned. In some cases, entire settlements were left in ruins and never rebuilt. One of the most striking examples is Ugarit. Ugarit was a wealthy coastal city deeply connected to international trade. Its archives preserve a moment of crisis. Clay tablets reveal letters written in urgency. A king sends messages asking for help. Enemy ships have been sighted. Defenses are uncertain. There is fear in the language. Then, silence. The city is destroyed. These are not stories written long after the event. They are messages captured in the final moments before collapse. Elsewhere, similar patterns appear. The Hittite capital is abandoned. Mycenaean palace centers fall into ruin. Trade networks begin to fragment. In some regions, writing disappears entirely for generations. And in Egypt, a different kind of record survives. Inscriptions from the reign of Ramses III describe attacks by groups often called the Sea Peoples. These accounts speak of movements across the region, of lands being disrupted, of enemies arriving by land and sea. The description is dramatic. Entire groups moving together, conflict spreading across multiple regions. Egypt claims to have resisted these forces, but even it emerges weakened. At first, this seems like a clear explanation. A wave of invaders destroys the Bronze Age world. But the deeper the evidence is examined, the less certain that conclusion becomes. Too many regions collapse at the same time. Too many different societies, with different political systems, fall within a similar period. So the question remains, what could bring down an entire interconnected world? The answer begins to take shape when the evidence is examined piece by piece. The first factor is warfare. There is clear evidence of violent destruction. Burned cities, broken fortifications, scattered weapons. Once powerful kingdoms weakened. Their borders became vulnerable. Raids increased. Conflicts spread. Groups that had once been controlled or contained may have moved more freely. But war alone does not explain the scale of collapse. The second factor is internal instability. Bronze Age societies relied on centralized systems. Palaces controlled resources and labor. If these systems became sustained, the effects would spread quickly. If leaders could no longer provide security or resources, confidence would decline. Rebellion may have played a role, while it leaves limited direct evidence. The sudden breakdown of authority in some regions suggests that internal unrest may have contributed to the collapse. The third factor is food supply. Ancient records hint at storages. Grain was essential for survival. Without it, cities could not sustain their populations. A series of poor harvests could create widespread hardship. And this leads to one of the most important developments in modern research. Climate evidence suggests that the Eastern Mediterranean experienced a period of prolonged drought around the time of the collapse. Reduced rainfall would have affected agriculture across multiple regions. Crop failures would increase pressure on already strained systems. Hunger forces movement. Movement creates tension. Tension leads to conflict. In this way, climate stress may have acted as a catalyst. Another possible factor lies beneath the surface. The region is geologically active. Some researchers suggest that a series of earthquakes may have struck during this period. If multiple major earthquakes occurred within a short time, they could have damaged cities, disrupted trade routes, and weakened infrastructure. But like the other factors, earthquakes alone do not provide a complete explanation. The key to understanding the collapse may lie in how these factors interacted. The Bronze Age world was highly connected. Trade networks linked distant regions. Political systems depended on stability across large areas. Resources moved through complex routes. This interconnectedness created strength but also vulnerability. If one part of the system failed, the effects could spread. If drought reduced harvests, food shortages would follow. If food shortages increased, populations would move. If population moved, conflict would rise. If conflict spread, trade routes would become unsafe. If trade failed, access to essential materials would decline. If materials declined, armies would weaken. If armies weakened, cities would fall. Each problem intensified the next. This was not a single event. It was a chain reaction. A system under pressure from multiple directions, unable to stabilize itself. For those living through it, the collapse was not a mystery. It was a reality of loss. Cities that had stood for generations were destroyed. Systems that had provided order disappeared. Trade networks that had supported economies broke down. Writing systems were lost in some regions, leaving gaps in the historical record. Life became uncertain. Yet from a broader perspective, the collapse was not only an ending, it was also a transformation. After the fall of the palace systems, new forms of organization began to emerge. Power became more localized, communities adapted to new conditions, trade networks were eventually built, though in different forms. One of the most significant changes was the gradual spread of iron. Unlike bronze, iron did not require the same combination of rare materials. It was more widely available. Over time, the shift changed the nature of tools and weapons, making them more accessible. This marked the beginning of a new era. There is also a detail that changes how the collapse can be understood. Some of the groups described as invaders may not have been purely attackers. They may have been migrants displaced by the same pressures affecting the regions they entered. If drought, famine, and instability forced populations to move, then the movements described in ancient records may represent attempts to survive rather than organized campaigns of conquest. The line between invader and refugee became unclear. Its perspective shifts the narrative. The collapse becomes not just a story of destruction, but of movement, adaptation, and survival. The Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's most complex events. No single explanation fully accounts for it. Instead, it appears to be the result of multiple factors interacting at the same time. Warfare, internal instability, food shortages, climate stress, and possible natural disasters all contributed to a system under strain. When that system could no longer maintain balance, it failed. And this is where the story reaches beyond the ancient world. The Bronze Age collapse is not only about the past. It raises questions about how societies function. The civilizations of the late Bronze Age were advanced, organized, and interconnected. They relied on trade, communication, and cooperation across large distances. Their systems appeared stable, until they were not. The collapse shows that complexity can create both strength and vulnerability. A system that depends on many interconnected parts can be efficient, but it can also be fragile. When multiple pressures build at once, the system may not be able to adapt quickly enough. In the end, the Bronze Age collapse does not offer a simple lesson. It offers a warning. Civilization depends on balance, on stable resources, on functioning systems, on the ability to respond to change. When that balance is disrupted across multiple fronts, even powerful societies can falter. The ruins left behind are not just remnants of the past. They are reminders of how quickly a world can change. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. The people living at the height of the Bronze Age likely believed their world would continue. They had no reason to think otherwise, until the collapse had already begun.